going to get started. Today our presenter is Dr. Tsoraides. I've known him since 2005, but I've learned more about him in the last year than in the prior years. And I think in looking at his CV, I think we can learn several things. I think for all of you starting out, it's very important to update it on a regular basis and write everything down. As minor as you think it is, it really gives everybody a full impression of really who you are and what you've done. So just put it in there. Dr. Tsoraides minored in history. And after reading some of his letters, I thought he minored in creative writing because he has this, I don't know, innate quality in his writing that is not something that's taught. But I think it's important to know our history. And I think it's important as we move forward to make improvements, no matter what you're doing in life. So he has been your program director since 2015. If you don't know it, he brings a passion to the job. You know, I know it might seem like tough love sometimes, but your education is his primary goal, really. So if he seems hard on you sometimes, oh well, suck it up. You know, it's all for a good reason. So, and I think as he's moved ahead in his career, he's really brought colorectal surgery to a new level in this community. He's been very instrumental in improving care, in bringing NAPRC here, and it's all been really for the goal of education for the patient. So, having said that, of course, we're going to talk about rectal cancer, quality. So, Dr. Tsoraides.
Thank you very much. So these are my disclosures. As Dr. Mamolito said, they're very kind words. So what brought you here? And there's 1,000 ways to answer that. But what is it that brought you here to this moment, to this point in your life, to this particular room, to the path that you're on in your life? We all have taken a journey to be here, and it's important to know in where you're going, where you've come from. And so with rectal cancer, that's very true, and I'm going to, unless anyone's offended, I'm going to take this off and try to stand back. In rectal cancer, it's very true that we really have to know where we've been to be able to understand the components of where we're going, and we'll highlight that. I do want to touch on kind of some of the things that are going on with rectal cancer care, and really kind of paint the picture as we had discussed in M&M as well. What does it take to provide high quality care? And what does it take to lead that care? And I don't care what field you're going to go into, you are all leaders in some way. One of the greatest stories known to man, one of the longest running histories of literature, and I feel obliged to continue on this Greek path based on Dr. Mamolito's comments a couple weeks ago. Odysseus, the most famous journey ever. There's a lot we can learn from this story still. It's also very entertaining. Some of it's rather crazy, and you really couldn't make it up. And then something happens in your life that's really crazy that you thought you couldn't make up, and you're reminded that these stories were written by men and women and carried down in that tradition. Residency is very much an odyssey, and you know, this is a journey in your life as well. And your training is an odyssey. Your career will be an odyssey as well. Just to show my credibility and being able to talk about both the Odyssey and rectal cancer, this is the island of Kiosk that my family is from, Dr. Tsoraides from as well. The proximity to Turkey is less than a mile at the closest point, and I bring that up just for relevance as we're talking. This picture is taken from about this point, looking past this island of Tsoraides towards Cizme in Turkey. And so that is that island, and then these mountains are over here. And so that is the type of environment Odysseus would have looked at when he's waking up in the morning, either on a ship or getting ready to take care of his troops. There's actually a one-line or one-word credit of the island in the Odyssey. It mentions Odysseus sailing past the island. Yeah, the name Kiosk, I'm going to do that thing, yes. The name Kiosk is related to the word snow, Kioni. We have high mountains on the island, and so it's not typical, but we have an island that has really various climates with the high mountain. And this is a picture taken descending from Mount Epos, and just to kind of show you the views and this driving. And I recall taking Dr. Pacheco on a tour of the island, and he could not look out the window because he thought for sure I was going to kill him. This is me sitting on Homer's Rock. So I'm a credible source for this entire talk. There are many islands and many places in Greece that take claim to being the birthplace and origin of Homer. Our island is one of them. We've actually named the airport Homericon, or Homer's airport, essentially, and not from The Simpsons, the philosopher and writer. And so it's told that this is potentially one of the rocks where he would sit and orate stories, and that's me sitting there, looking at essentially a similar view that we were looking at before on the same coast. So if we're going on this journey and we're trying to sort out our careers, and we're trying to defeat rectal cancer, which is not an easy task, we need to know where we started. We need to know where we're going. We need to ask some questions. Why are we doing this? Why am I leaving home in the first place? It's comfortable. Why not just keep doing what I'm doing? Is it worth it? What am I going to need to get there? Do I have a map? Do I have the right crew? There's going to be challenges. Do I know what they're going to be? Can I know what they're going to be? Will we even be the same when we return home? And more importantly, will we get home? And none of these things are certain. So this is my history. This is where I started. Told myself I wasn't going to do that. Paraskevik, my grandmother. This just happens to be my aunt. There's not a lot of pictures with just my grandmother and grandfather. Pandelis Xidias, Dimitris Tsoraides, Irini Tsoraides, Sterios Tsoraides. So this is my mother's side with my mom's oldest sister. My grandfather was born in Cizme, in Asia Minor, which is what is now Turkey. My great-grandfather was born in Constantinople, which is now Turkey. They both were not native to that island, but I attribute my origin to that island. My grandfather, who's in the top left, right, was born on that island, and so that's my father's side. This is my mother's side. These are all of my dad's uncles down in the bottom row. These two are the last two remaining living people from the picture, other than my aunt as well. This overlaps with the story of the Odyssey in some ways. So, does anyone remember where Odysseus was from? Ithaca, which is over here in the Ionian Sea. Troy is over here. At that time in the world, it's the other side of the world. Okay? This was not just a minor, like, we're going to take the day cruise to Santorini type of thing. This was a huge journey. Okay? Crete is all the way down here. The island of Kiosk is right here. Okay? As you can see, if you were making map with borders, you would never put this with this, right? You would just say, like, let's do that. Well, that's what's trying to happen right now in the world. There's a lot of oil that was found right over here. Everyone's fighting for it. There's a lot of history involved in how do you sort out these problems. And I'm not trying to take sides on either one of them. But the point is, you have to know history to sort out issues and problems. My great-grandfather Dimitri was born up here from family that was over here, but a name and ancestry that's from over here. So anyone with the last name Idis in Greek is from that southern coast of the Black Sea. That's where the names originated. My Papu Padeli was born over here in Jezmet. And they, both men migrated. One is actually both as refugees. they came to the island as refugees, to the island of Kiosk. Odysseus made his trip across that way and then all over the place. And if you've read the book, you know he does get home eventually. And again, I just wanted to point this out a little bit clearer. This is kind of how the map looks today. And so when we're sitting having our coffee, we're looking over at Turkey. It's a very nice backdrop. It's just like looking at East Peoria across the river. So here is the surgeon's map in rectal cancer. There's nothing really complex about it at face value, but the rectum is going through the pelvis. It's a story we always tell to our patients. They want to know, well, why do I have to go through all this extra treatment? My uncle had colon cancer, and it was a pretty easy thing. The rectum is deep in the pelvis, surrounded by very vital structures. The consequences and stakes of the surgery are very high. Just like we were talking with Dr. Petrozelli and M&M, there are certain parts of the body where the consequences of operating are significant. And in some cases, there are no parts of the body where the consequences are ever free, and we also heard a little bit about that in M&M. And so we were in a deep space with an organ that's surrounded by other organs and a tumor, then that subsequently fills that space. We also have to appreciate the sophistication of a rectum. Dr. Bonello loves to tell the story about taking your hands and putting sand and marbles and air and water in your hands and just letting one of those components go. Your hands cannot do it, but your rectum can. And I still use that story for patients because it's kind of hard to understand, well, why does this matter? It's about control. It's about quality of life. More importantly, this is a map of oncologic perception for rectal cancer that is relevant. It's a very simple diagram, but what it demonstrates is the lymph nodes around the rectum and their relation to the rectum and the pelvic structures, and what is known as a total mesorectal excision of taking that entire package intact, which is something that mentally we take for granted right now. But there were challenges with that for years. And so one of the first lessons I want to share with you is knowing when you're wrong, okay? Knowing when you're wrong and knowing when to stop. This is a map from about 1920-ish of Greece and Turkey in relation. And what you'll notice is it's different than the map I showed you from today. What you'll notice is that one of my grandfathers had his birthplace liberated. We'll call it liberated. And I'm not trying to be political by any means. But it was part of Greece at one point. Constantinople was kind of in between and not quite. But the borders changed on my ancestry. But it doesn't look like that today. I'll get to it, but they didn't know when to stop. They didn't know who to trust either. So, if we go into rectal cancer surgery, the history of it is really very infantile at this point. For hundreds and thousands of years, there was essentially nothing. There are some reports of potentially palliating with colostomy as early as antiquity. Then around the 18th century, you get the idea of a colostomy, and once again, our pediatric surgeons serving as innovators for us, although it wasn't really a field of pediatric surgery at that point, I guess. And then in France and Europe, starting to develop and form colostomies, which are typically done not where we anticipate them now, but down in the inguinal-iliac region. It wasn't until 1850 that Luke did the first transrectus colostomy. There were some, including Beaver, you know, the thing, going lumbar, which you can imagine that's probably not very fun. So then you get into, well, when did we actually start taking out rectal cancers? And that's something that developed in the 19th century. Initially, it was really just a transanal approach for support. I think surgeons just trying to say, well, is there anything we can do here? Les Franck doing a transanal approach. He had actually trained with Decourvain. Kraski's, that name is still attributed to an approach for a surgery that can be used where you actually go prone and go transgluteal, parasacral, or between the coccyx and taking out a portion to make a window to unroof the rectum, and you can make an anastomosis in that way. He has a series of having done it that way. The outcomes are not great, and unfortunately, because you really can't mobilize well through that, I think that's what they were finding, and ended up just doing a lot of sacral ostomies, which is essentially just let it pour out of the wound. So it wasn't until Czerny that we actually have the first APR. APR, abdominal and perineal resection, meaning doing a two-site resection, both from the abdomen and from the perineum to remove the rectum. So you'll hear the name St. Mark's pop up a lot in colorectal surgery. There's a St. Mark's retractor, which is a lifesaver when you're doing open pelvic surgery. And Dr. Miles was really the first to do a good description of that procedure. And if you look at that description, it's very similar to what should be done today. Unfortunately, I don't think that message became ubiquitous, and so I would say that probably Miles was doing either an appropriate or near appropriate total mesorectal excision as early as 1908. The mortality rates were not great, but you know, this is 1908 in surgery. So I would say that's you know, it's kind of what you get back then. Lloyd Davies is really given a lot of the credit for kind of what we consider as the modern APR. And there was also some work by Mayo as well in that arena. So APR became kind of this is what you do for rectal cancer. If it's down there, you got to remove it all, okay? This is rectal cancer. The only option is colostomy if there is an option. Otherwise, it's death. That's as good as it gets up until even just over 100 years ago. Anastomoses took a while to catch on. There was some work on this higher in the abdomen early on. We have a pull-through technique described, as early as 1892. But it really took a while for technology to catch up to get us where we're at today. And so parallel to that era of removing the rectum, we have technology getting us to where we are today to be able to reconnect things and make anastomoses. But there's really not much else going on in rectal cancer for the 20th century, the first part of it at least. And so this is what we get. We get wrong. We get like 100 years of wrong. This is clamp, cut through the mesorectum, you know, instead of staying in the embryologic plane to keep all the mesentery intact. And there's a high risk of involving the circumferential resection margin. So recurrence rates were abysmal, and I apologize, I couldn't find a good way to scan this textbook because I was looking for old data. And if you look even into the 90s and 2000s, and I zoomed in, it's a little hard to read, but the last column, the recurrence rates are not good. Local recurrence, meaning cancer growing back in the pelvis where you've operated. Even the author of the textbook, publishing his series, a wonderful man, Dr. Bonello introduced me to him at the National Society meeting. He's passed away now. 18% local recurrence rate. I would get run out of town if my local recurrence rate was 18% right now. But that's a leader in the field having not distant recurrence. So this is not a liver met that pops up later. This is local recurrence. And so you say, well, what the hell's going on? You know, did anyone ask what the hell's going on? Yes, a lot of people did. Now, these recurrence numbers are a little bit jumbled, but I still want to show you that even into this century, we're having recurrence rates that are not appropriate, really. That big giant ogre ate a few of them, but he blinded it, and he snuck out underneath the ram. So sometimes you got to be clever. In many ways, you cannot plan for everything, right? How are you supposed to know that the God of the sea is going to try and destroy you and leave you shipwrecked? At the same time, surprises can be both good and bad. How are you also supposed to know that Athena, the god of war and wisdom, is trying to save you every step of the way and has saved you multiple times? So I don't like surprises at all in the operating room. It's my least favorite thing of anything in the world, including a lot of bad things. But you can't plan for everything. That's the problem. You cannot plan for everything. You have to set yourself up for success. That's a big part of what your training is for and what your education is for. You need to be open to opportunities when they sit right in front of you. So when the new path opens, you have to be ready. You cannot be indecisive and contemplate. In the operating room, that will happen. Or there's another thing you can do to save the patient's life, stop the bleeding, do the thing. You cannot be indecisive. You have to have set yourself up for success and take action. And you need a good team. And if you read anything about modern economy, modern industry, modern corporations, successful teams, diverse teams are the best teams. When you're open to multiple ideas and have people with different journeys, the overall course is better. So, if you have the right team and the right role players, you can pretty much weather any storm. I also think it's important to realize that knowledge is not proprietary by any means. And so I grew up listening to this from my father, who heard it from his father, and so forth and so on, and begot and begot. Tell me who your friends are so I can tell you who you are. And so I kind of grew up with this and kind of said, well, my friends don't really dictate who I am. And then you look at it and you say, well, I have really good friends, actually. So they probably helped raise me a little bit, too. And I'm really grateful for my good friends who I can count on one hand and trust all my life. And then I'm reading Chinese philosophy recently. I had read it in college before, and I just went back to the book, which I encourage you all to do, by the way. If there's a book that you maybe read in college but didn't really read, go back to it now. It's so interesting how your new perspective changes the way you interpret something, and you get a lot out of it. But this is 220 BC. If you don't know a man, look at his friends. It's the same thing. I think I'm turning Chinese, My history, I think that there's so much overlap in wisdom in the world, and for us to want to control it and own it, for us to want to publish something first and have it belong to us and not share that, those are bad things. Knowledge is not proprietary. Wisdom should be for everyone. And in learning, there's nothing more profitable than to associate with those who are learned. A team of successful people around you so you can produce good results. And this is perhaps my favorite quote. Live as if you were to die tomorrow. Learn as if you were to live forever. You never stop learning. But you often need a mentor. You need someone to guide you. Mentor, the word mentor comes from mentoras. That was Odysseus' friend. Odysseus honors his commitment to his ex, which we can tweet about that later if we want. But he leaves his young son in the mentorship, which it wasn't known as at the time, of mentoras. And along with the swineherd, but saying mentor and swineherd doesn't have the same ring as just mentor. And so they helped raise the boy and helped guide the boy, and the boy eventually was trying to find his father and was part of the safe return of his father. So these are my mentors, male mentors. I've already said the matriarchs are perhaps more important than these people, but from a professional standpoint, these are the four most influential people in my life. My grandfather and father, which just goes without saying. Our previous chair, who believed in me enough to match a so-so candidate into his surgery program, but also to promote me throughout my career to this day, backing me up, giving me advice. I call him frequently. I'm not here today if it's not for these four people. Dr. Bonello, who's sitting in the back of the room. I'm not here today if it's not for Dr. Bonello. His passion for the field, his joy of the field, his constant focus on the joy of the field instead of the burden of the field, his love for patients, his love for patient care, he taught me the Holy Flame. This is how I got it. It wasn't through a book. Who reads? This is the man who taught me about this field, and I owe everything in this practice. So everything you see today about rectal cancer in Peoria, it's on the back of Dr. Bonello, who was really the first colorectal specialist to engage this community and grow and build and develop a thing. So the NAPRC program is as much his as it is OSF's. You have to share your successes, and that's what Heald did, and he was a true mentor. This is how you do quality. Europe figured it out. Heald goes to Sweden, or they came to him, I don't remember which, but he brought in surgeons and he traveled, and he taught people what he knew, because it was the right thing. He was able to decrease the permanent colostomy surgeries from 60% to half. He was able to decrease the local recurrence to almost a third in Sweden, an entire country. It's not just a hospital, it's an entire country. He helped that, he fixed that. Netherlands, same results. High morbidity, high leak rate, fine, there's a learning curve, okay? Still better. I'd rather have a leak than die from cancer, maybe not. You have to, it's okay, the video stopped now, it's safe to save everyone. If you want to make progress, it's going to take sacrifice. And there's no woman I know who sacrificed more than my mother. This beautiful woman has set aside her goals time and time again for the betterment of others. And I don't just mean me, I don't just mean my father. Everyone she comes across, she will literally, feed them, go hungry herself, work tirelessly to accomplish a goal. That's grandson number 7 in her lap right there, Dimitri. So sacrifice takes work, and this is another great quote by Thomas Edison. Opportunity is missed by most people because it's dressed in overalls and looks like work. There's no easy money, kids, okay? And for the med students especially, everything you're going to get into, it's hard work. If you want to be successful, you got to work. But you can be happy working hard. That's why it's so important that you choose right. You need to choose the right field that you're passionate about, not that someone appointed to you. You need to attract yourself or find mentors who will guide you in the right way. And you need to seek out practices that will guide and mentor you so that when you work, it doesn't feel like work. And there are 1,000 versions of that quote, right? So if you put in the work, you will reap the rewards. It's going to take extra training, extra education, extra time, extra effort, extra resources. But even in the Bible, let us not be weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Don't give up. I'm gonna try and get through a lot of stuff quickly, and I apologize if I run over. I won't be offended if there's an exodus. You have to have a system. This is my grandfather and the second to last set of photographs he had in his life when I was visiting him in 2015. About a month after this, he gets into a car accident, and this is the last set of images of my grandfather in his life and his journey. This is how his journey ends. He had a car accident, but survived it, had confusion, went home. Went to the pharmacist, got some medicines. The pharmacist said, yeah, it's just a headache, go home, take some of these. And some friends saw him, his brother saw him walking back home, because they live in the village still. He knew it wasn't right, but figured, my grandfather, maybe he went and had a couple drinks or something, but goes home. Essentially, the neighbor finds him crashed on the floor, takes him to the hospital. The hospital says, sorry, there's nothing we can do on the island. He gets life-flighted, essentially choppered to Athens. This is what we see. Okay, anyone who treats head injury knows this is not good. He's got midline shift. He has surgery. They do a craniotomy. By the time I get to Greece to visit, he's in a bed that is essentially, it looks like a storage room with a ventilator that looks like a backpack. He's alert, but the short of it is he died 2 days after I returned to America. He died because there wasn't a system. I'm 100% confident if Dr. Evans' trauma team was treating my grandfather, he would have lived and may even still be alive today, although he was 78 there, but we lived quite a long time on the island. So he would have survived if we had a system. There's no centralized trauma system in Greece. And so everything is fragmented. So everyone gets to be the expert. Everyone gets to decide this person's going to live or this person's going to die. There's no protocol. There's not even a good EMS system to say, well, hey, we have an 80-year-old who just got into a car accident. No one would ever let that person leave the scene in this country. Don't take for granted the systems that are in place that protect you on a day-to-day basis. And that's trauma, that's cancer care, that's whatever it is. Cancer care is the very same thing. You have to have a system. You need, at a national level, direction for population-based directives to standardize care. You need multidisciplinary teams. And this is why we got to an organization called Ostrich pushing for nationalized, centralized care in cancer, which is already being done in breast, and rectal is lagging behind. And so the principles are, you need to do a TME. You need good path to understand what you did. You need good imaging. Measure twice, cut once. You need good therapies still. You need a multidisciplinary team. Treatment is complex. The outcomes are bad. I'm shooting through this now just to kind of keep you guys on time. And so we really have in America a lot of non-specialist providers in low-volume hospitals, and a lot of this data is borrowed directly from the National Accreditation for Program for Rectal Cancer. So suboptimal adherence to guidelines, positive rates that are too high, outcomes that are worse than Europe. 70% of hospitals in America treat less than 20 patients a year, so the majority of hospitals are considered low volume in this country. Only 30%, including ours, would be considered high volume, and only 6% are more than 50 a year, which is where we fall. So we're one of the highest volume hospitals in treating rectal cancer in the country, and we have a team. And so the positive rates are too high, 17.2%. In America. This is recent data, within a couple of years, not extremely recent, but we're doing much worse than Europe. Our overall positive circumferential recession margin rates are terrible compared to Europe. This data, that's all the mentor, that's healed, that's all that is. So, lymph nodes, another thing. A third of the patients are having a suboptimal lymph node yield in America. Currently, terrible. The truth hurts. The people who make you cry are the ones who love you the most. And I've had people challenge me on this, but it holds true. If you care enough, it hurts you. So hearing the truth sometimes hurts, but it's still the truth. He who comes to you with censure is your teacher. He who comes with approbation is your friend, but he who flatters you is your enemy. People who tell you the truth care about you more than people who are ready to flatter you. So knowing the truth with your data is important. Okay, and so the key point of this slide is that only 28% of patients in America, if you apply the metrics or standards of the accreditation program, only 28% of patients are receiving care that hits all the metrics for excellence in rectal cancer care. And so that's why we need an accreditation program for all of these reasons, to decrease variation in care, to improve care, improve efficiency, make sure we're having best practices. And so the man in the middle here has always told me, when you're right, you're right. Don't stop. Don't let anyone stop you. Now certainly you have to learn to compromise, and that's something I'm still learning in life. But if you're right, and it's the right thing, you do not stop. You stand behind it and you defend it. And that's what this man has done his whole life, and it's cost him a lot too. This is how we get NAPRC, because you have a group of people whom I've come to know in the national level who did not stop. This is the right thing to do, and we're not stopping. And it's still rolling, and we're accrediting more and more programs across the country. You're going to have a lot of people resisting the change. You need to have patience, you need to educate, you need to remediate, but you also need to know when to eliminate components. And there are such things as bad apples. They're few and far between, though. Most people will respond to education and remediation. You cannot fail. If you consider failure an option, you may resort to it. And Frank Sinatra said, the big lesson in life, baby, never be as scared of anyone or anything. And so that means you're going to end up being seen as unreasonable. George Bernard Shaw said, the reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable one persists in trying to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man. People will call you unreasonable. They'll think you're crazy. Don't stop if you're right. Consider the consequences. So what happened in the liberation is that they had won a significant swath of land. And I want you to know that in 1821, when Greece was first liberated from the Ottoman Empire, there were 4,000 people living in Athens. It was nothing. It was a historical reference with a cool statue building at the top of the, or a marble building at the top of the mountain. Cesma had over 100,000 Greeks at that same time, 100,000 Greeks living in that area. And so it wasn't a minor thing to move the map. This is a big deal. It's like saying we took New York or Chicago. They kept going. The European allies told them, stop. The Kaiser in Germany said, no, keep going. They kept going. They got into deep, just like Napoleon did in Russia, just like Hitler did in Russia. They went too far, got greedy, lost it all. Pushed back all the way to the view you saw in the picture at the beginning of the talk. This is what they did to it. They burned it down. My great-grandfather, Padeli's father, was killed from an injury of this exile. This is what my grandfather saw as he was on a boat looking back at his home. Imagine leaving your home and seeing that. Those are the consequences. Don't get greedy. It's not always a celebration just because you got the patient put back together. There are consequences for the patient in treating rectal cancer, and those consequences are driving a lot of care right now. That's called LARS, and it's not some Northern European. That's called bone arterial resection syndrome, which is composed of a lot of things that screw up your life. Here's another matriarch from my my wife's family, and she didn't really know what the shirt said when I let her borrow it. We walked around New Orleans all day with her wearing that, and I'll tell you that this is the coolest, funnest person you'll ever meet in your life. And she doesn't want me to tell you how old she is. So anyhow, about 40% of patients that have mid to low rectal cancer surgery are going to develop some component of LARS. So this is a big deal. It screws up their life. They hate their lives. And so if you want to get better, you need to take a lesson from this Tsoraides, which is now the third that I've told you in this story. Ask questions. You know, Daddy, what's this? Daddy, what's that? If you have the curiosity of a child, you can aim high. The greatest danger for most of us is not that our aim is too high and we miss it, but that it is too low and we reach it. And there's, again, 1,000 variations on that. So as doctors, it's our job to follow the rules and guidelines, right? You can say, well, how are you going to change things if you don't follow the guidelines? It's our obligation as professionals to challenge those guidelines every day. But to do that in a structured fashion with teams and research protocols and appropriate measures. Because the problem is, and I don't want to take anything away from this quote, which is really focused on racism against blacks in America, but when I came back to it as I was preparing this talk, I thought it really resonated well with me in terms of why we're changing the way we treat rectal cancer. If you treat different things the same, it can generate as much inequality as treating the same things differently. Okay? And what that means is we can't do the same thing for every patient. So year after year, we've been taking stage 2 and 3 rectal cancers and just routinely giving them 5.5 weeks of radiation and chemo and operating. And that's okay if you don't care about the consequences, but the surgery and radiation combined, and I'll take credit for this, the surgery is probably worse, but the radiation therapy, although it's standard, has very undesirable side effects that when you combine that with surgery are really bad for the patient. Loss of relationships because of loss of intimacy, because, so these are consequences that you can't always prepare a patient for very well, which is why you need a team. So the Prospect trial is looking at this saying, are there patients that we can omit the radiation from? And this Prospect, or N1048, which we participated here at this hospital, really is we're waiting for the data still. The completion of total kind of data collection is coming next year. The accrual is already closed. This is going to give us data to guide us on the next path. And this is from Buddha. There's a nice parable about someone coming to the door and answering and all that stuff. And then at the end, you get, if at some point in your life you adopt an idea or perception as the absolute truth, you close the door of your mind. This is the end of seeking the truth. And not only do you no longer seek the truth, but even if the truth comes in person and knocks on your door, you'll refuse to open it. Attachment to views, attachment to ideas, attachment to perceptions are the biggest obstacle to the truth. And there's my evolution of iPhone collection. So watch and wait is the latest thing, and we're getting to the end, so I apologize for keeping you over. I'm sure none of you are surprised that I talked longer than I should have. So watch and wait is the concept that some patients actually respond so well to chemo and radiation that they don't even need surgery. That's called a complete clinical response. You only have a complete pathologic response if you remove the thing and prove it. And so this is really born out of Brazil, and it's Abrahama's group has really led most of the data. When they did a review of 17 studies, 8 of them were theirs, which also is something to think about. 22.4% of patients had a complete clinical response. That's pretty good. The problem is we don't know, it's not uniform. This is not reliable because not all patients got the same type of neoadjuvant therapy. Of those, 20% also had a local regrowth, and the big question is, can you still salvage those patients? 80% of those patients were able to have an R0 resection still, which means 20% either couldn't get an R0 or didn't have surgery. So there's a subset of patients that may be harmed by this innovation. It doesn't mean it's wrong. A large number don't have a local recurrence. And so this is what's playing in the minds of surgeons right now. Here's another series, 2-year local regrowth, 15.7%. So there's a group of patients, about 20%, that you will treat and not have to operate. And if you don't measure twice and you cut once, you might be wrong, okay? Or if you can't really cut twice, can you? I guess if you have a complication. So don't worry about colorectal surgeons, though. If we're no longer operating on rectal cancer, we'll still have something to do. And you don't really know what to do with the results yet. So you can't just jump on data until there's a good consensus. But a lot of the ability to get a total response is by moving all of the chemotherapy up front, right? And that's not something that was obvious to everyone as you move into this. But, if you treat a lot, then you'll get a better response. There's also debate about how many cycles is total neoadjuvant therapy, or how many months is total neoadjuvant therapy. Is there bias in the data because of the Brazilian center maybe, having some bias? We don't have long-term data yet, but it is very promising. And this is what's guiding cancer treatment now. There's a lot of cancers that we will not be operating on that we do today because they're going to find therapies and immunotherapies that change the way we treat things. And in order to move, you cannot become complacent or distracted. And so Odysseus was stuck on Calypso's island. He was not happy. And in our lives, we can get complacent. We can find new technology that distracts us and maybe is not appropriate for patients. We might inappropriately apply data or not have data. We might try to innovate as an individual rather than doing it in the structure of a team, which is much safer. We might not have a mentor helping guide us along. We might have significant problems with money or work-life imbalance that affect our ability to stay focused on our goals. And so there's a lot of unanswered questions, like how much radiation do we really need to give? Let's operate less, or radiate less. But now we're radiating stage 1s that would have never got radiation because we're saying that the stage 2s do so well that maybe if you radiate a stage 1 instead of operate, the outcome is better. It's all over the place. I mean, Dr. Fisher and I regularly are like, what the fuck is going on? It's very hard to keep up with all this. You have to stay focused on keeping up with this. There's also transanal excision. There's immunotherapy. You need to know when to stop. There's also transanal total mesorectal excision. The outcomes are scary. Urethral injuries and things that we never see otherwise. A whole field of surgeons, in my opinion, who didn't want to adopt robotics, the naysayers of robotics that we talked about in Grand Rounds last week, decided, well, let's just come up with laparoscopy through the anus. Terrible complications. Some people will have good results, but in my mind, I think it's an ugly thing, and you need to know when to stop. You need to know when Calypso is trying to distract you. So where is home? And we're wrapping up now. This is home for Odysseus, Penelope, and Telemachus. This is why he wanted to go home. This is what it was all about. For me, this is home. All of these photos were taken on the same island. All of these people were married on that island. This is the most beautiful woman in all of Greece, my wife. So was it worth it? Yeah, it was worth it. Look at that. It's all worth it. Every day it's worth it. You know, we forget that, and we come home tired, and I didn't see my kids for 48 hours this week, or my wife, and it was rough. But what is it about? It's all about people. Mitt Romney famously said, corporations are people, right? And he actually lost the election because of that phrase. It's a misguided comment. Yeah, there are people who compose of a corporation, but corporations get distracted. Corporations essentially marry Calypso and are more focused on control and profits and revenue, and they lose sight of the people they serve, they lose sight of the people that serve them. It's not about the corporation, it's not about the bottom line. Yes, we want our retirement accounts healthy, but it's about the people. Everything we do is about the people, including cancer care, including our careers, including our personal lives. There's nothing that is relevant in this world that doesn't involve you and another person. We are social beings. Look at how much we're learning that now with COVID and being restricted from interacting with other people. It's strangulating the world. And people are learning that. And I hope we come out of this much happier. And so for the patient, home is returning to normal. They just want to sit on the toilet, do their business, and move on. But that toilet controls them many times after surgery. And that issue is what guides the research to say, why are we watching and waiting? This is insane. Well, maybe it's not insane for the few patients that get to just go back to the toilet and do their business, okay? Or get to continue to have sex because we haven't destroyed their health nerves with surgery. They want a cure, obviously, but that's not the only thing. Their bowel function, their intimacy, they don't want pain. They don't want to have a stoma. They just want to spend some time with their loved ones. Same thing for us. We want to spend more time with our loved ones. And it takes work and sacrifice to accomplish a cure and to lead change, to embrace that change. You got to appreciate the people around you who are helping you. You have to rely on them. You need to treat the people and not the disease. And that's, again, paraphrasing what a lot of smart people have said. So, to wrap it all up, for your journey, you need to set the vision. The most important thing a leader can do is setting a vision of where everyone's headed. You need to know your history, and I hope I've made that case pretty strongly. I enjoy history, I always have. I think that's another reason why I love and admire Dr. Bonello so much, and many of our faculty who are historiophiles. You need to know when you're wrong, and sometimes you just need to apologize, sometimes you need to stop. You need to know the truth. The truth should always guide you. You must trust your team. If you don't trust your team, you're not on the right team. You're just not. And no one should commit you to be on the wrong team. You need to set yourself up for success. You need to know your role, like my crazy cousin does. You need to have a system. People die when you don't have a system. My grandfather died because there wasn't a system. My grandmother, his wife, actually died from a strangulated ventral hernia that they refused to operate on. Simple thing. Should have lived much longer. She actually might still be alive today if that mistake hadn't happened. You need to trust that system. You have to be ready to work hard. Nothing is gained easily in this world. Work hard. If something comes easy, wonderful. Keep working hard. You cannot plan for everything. If you have a team, if you set yourself up for success, you'll get through it. Problems are going to come. You guys are all going to have rough days. You're going to have days where you question if you really did the right thing, if you chose the right field. You're going to have days where someone dies and you were involved in that, and you're going to question everything you did. And that's a good process to go through. But if you have a team, if you have support, if you have people to go home to get you through it, you will get through it, and the next person will benefit from that journey that you went on. You can't save everyone. You need to ask questions. You need to constantly improve. This is why research is so important. This is why data is so important. This is why you need to know how to interrogate literature. When you write, you don't stop. You just don't. Everything is about people. Doesn't matter what you're thinking of. Business, economics, physics, medicine, politics. It's all about people. Go home.